Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are, welcome to AI for Good all year and of course, always online. I'm Chris Botman presenting AI for Good Perspectives. AI for Good is a year-round digital platform where AI innovators and problem owners learn, build and connect to identify practical AI solutions to advance the UN Sustainable Development Goals. AI for Good Perspectives offers expert insights, global visions and shared solutions from the AI for Good community. Today, we bring you Professor Joanna Batstone, who's Director of Monash Data Futures Institute in Melbourne. Hello to you, Professor.
Hello, Chris. It's great to be here today.
So tell me, in Melbourne, not everybody knows what Monash is. So tell us more about the Institute.
Monash University was created about 60 years ago now and grew up in Melbourne with our Clayton campus and our Caulfield campus. And then increasingly over the last 60 years, we've become a truly international university with a number of different campuses around the world, including in China and Indonesia, a partnership in India, a center in Europe, in Italy, the Prato Center, and a number of different international alliances. And the Monash Data Futures Institute is our focus around data science and AI, particularly for social good, where we bring together all of the researchers across the Monash family of universities to advance the state of the art in both AI and data science technologies, but with a particular lens and focus around social impact and particular projects that will really drive meaningful change.
So what are the key priorities for you at the Monash?
The Monash priorities for us are really encompassed in our Monash Impact 2030 strategic plan, where we've got a real focus on three big global challenges. One of which is around climate change, very topical for today. Another focus increasingly is around what we would describe as geopolitical security, this really international world that we're in, and the impact of nations working together and being able to work effectively to bridge new capabilities and new solutions for global harmony. And then the third key priority area is around thriving communities. And the tendency is always to think about thriving communities in the context of health and well-being, but it's a much broader statement around thriving communities that includes the community of a city, the community of a nation, and the community of like-minded individuals coming together around some common themes and topics.
So when you talk about communities, so we hear a lot about smart cities. So can you give me an example in Melbourne itself?
Absolutely. So obviously we've all been living through this global pandemic for the last 18 months. And one of the pieces of work that we kicked off at Monash University about 18 months ago now was something that we called the Melbourne City Experiment, which was really an effort to look at the application of data science and AI technologies around the experiences of the city, life before, during, and after, hopefully, COVID-19. And so that led into a series of research projects that enable us to look at the different experiences of people within the city that encompassed a variety of different programs of work, things like the impact of a pandemic on your transportation patterns with public transport, or the impact of a pandemic on a drug adherence and prescription dosing associated with either being able to get to or not being able to get to your local pharmacy or drugstore, or the impact of domestic violence, or the changes of impact around the family as you bring people together in a very close-knit, crowded situation in a home where you've now got people trying to work, people trying to study, kids at home. So we did a lot of work around data science and AI analysis, trying to understand that lived experience of the community that we have here in Melbourne during the different phases of lockdown that we went through last year.
I'm I'm intrigued by when you say dealing with things like domestic violence. How does AI in what you've been doing impact that?
One of the pieces of work that we've been doing within the Institute is to look at how we can leverage social media analytics to understand the pulse and the tenor of conversations that are going on. And so by analyzing social media from a variety of different sources, including Twitter and Reddit and other social media platforms, we were able to look at and understand some of the dynamics of conversations that were going on as people were being forced into communities, and in fact, sometimes being locked down in an apartment complex. And so it was really trying to leverage the sources of data around us that we can bring together to tell a coherent story about that lived urban experience of being a city dweller in the middle of a pandemic.
I mean, I'm talking to you from France, and right now it's a very big issue over here. So was the information that you come up with, and is it open source? Could it be useful internationally?
Very likely so. One of the programs of work that we have is around enabling tools and technologies and data sources to be available through partnerships with both Australian organizations and international organizations to be able to look at leveraging data technology platforms that we have within Monash to provide additional data sources to other researchers around the world. And one key example of those technology platforms increasingly is the work around our health sciences platform, where we in fact house a number of different clinical registries of data for health researchers worldwide, all of which is supported by our Monash technology platforms and our Helix technology platform. So this whole notion of bringing data to the analytics is something that we're very focused on, particularly in the context of enabling international collaborations.
Now, Australia is a leading economy, of course, everybody knows that in the Asia Pacific region. What's the Australian government doing in AI? And is that a key priority over there? And they're helping you, or are you working together?
So increasingly, AI has been a big focus for the Australian government. And in fact, earlier in 2021, the Australian government launched a new national AI agenda and plan with a focus on enabling economic growth and productivity for the nation, particularly coming out of a post-COVID recovery environment. And so that national AI agenda from Australia takes a number of different components, and it's led in partnership with the Australian government's Central Research Laboratories, CSIRO, and their Data 61 arm. And the focus is around enabling industry and economic growth, but increasingly enabling the talent population that's needed to spur industry's focus around AI, including programs around the next generation of AI graduates, both at bachelor's, master's, and PhD level. And so that new national AI agenda kicked off early last year, and we're just starting to see it roll out in terms of programmatic initiatives and funding for universities and industry to come together around that national framework.
Okay. Professor Batstone, you frequently in your papers have said this AI has to show that it's for social good. In Australia, is there acceptance that it's for good for humanity, or is there wariness, and how do you overcome that?
That's a really good question. So one of the things that we did last year was we commissioned a research study to ask the Australian public about their attitudes towards AI. What does the Australian public think AI is? What does the Australian public think governments ought to do? Is the Australian public supportive of research developments in AI? And so we commissioned this study. And one of the important things about it was often when people think about artificial intelligence, we come at it from a perspective of it's all about technology. But in fact, what's really important for us at the Monash Data Futures Institute is the need to bring together cross-disciplinary study. And so this white paper and analysis that we did around Australian public attitudes brought together our researchers in the faculties of education and law, as well as the faculty of IT, to explore the impact on Australian society from the perspective of AI. And there are some very interesting findings that came out of it. One of which was, not too surprisingly perhaps, a lot of the general public doesn't really understand, well, what do we mean by AI? Even though in fact AI is all around us in our smartphones, in social media, in newspaper analysis of information. But there was a general awareness or lack of awareness around how prevalent AI is in today's society. Another key observation, which I thought was really interesting, was a tremendous amount of trust in the public that there was a real opportunity for AI to have meaningful and beneficial impact for society, and a lot of trust around the national agencies like CSIRO to be leading the nation forward with the universities around a public discourse on the application of AI. And so those were really interesting findings coming out of that report, but it was very much a conversation around what does the individual in the street think AI means to them? And are they trusting that there really is an opportunity for social good, as opposed to perhaps some of the gloom and doom stories that are often propagated in the public discourse?
Yeah, I've always found it kind of intriguing and strange that people, the public, have a little mistrust of AI, but they put their whole lives on their smartphone.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think there's a real awareness, well, increasing awareness of the smartphone being a demonstrator of some of the ways that AI is used today within society, that increasingly I think people are understanding and becoming aware of.
Now, as your data institute in Monash, what's your long-term projects and the goals worldwide? And tell us a bit about how big's your team? What are they doing on a kind of weekly basis?
Yes, so we represent probably one of the biggest cohorts of AI and data science practitioners across Asia Pacific. We have over 550-ish researchers as part of the institute. And so we represent this work across not just the Australian campuses, but also the work across Southeast Asia. And so we're a pretty big team as we bring together the researchers very much from a cross-disciplinary perspective. We represent actually all 10 of the faculties at Monash, including the humanities. And that's a very important focus for us, that we're not thinking about AI in the context just of the application to medicine or engineering and robotics and IT, but we are also then thinking about the legal, the societal, the human rights, the data privacy aspects of what some of these new technologies mean. So in terms of longer term projects, these three global challenges I mentioned around climate, geopolitical security, and thriving communities are the big thematic areas of investment. Within that, though, as we look at, for example, thriving communities and our partnerships with our medical faculty colleagues, with our colleagues in the pharmacy faculty, we're looking for new ways of being able to leverage AI to accelerate drug design, drug discovery, drug delivery, the management of clinical trials, the application of AI to the analysis of medical imaging. And so that broad body of research around AI for the health sciences is probably one of the bigger investment areas. So that's really a key focus.
This is about moving the UN Sustainable Development Goals forward. So how's Monash? I mean, you talked about humanity, you talked about medicine, you talked about domestic violence. I mean, we've got to bear in mind that ultimately it's about those Sustainable Development Goals, right?
Yes, exactly. And so climate, health, poverty, economic sustainability all relate very clearly there. let me come back to climate, because I think this is one of the areas where we've got clearly a big opportunity here around sustainable development. And we have a portfolio of work within the Institute that's in partnership with the Monash Sustainable Development Institute, with some key initiatives around, for example, looking at satellite data to be able to analyze floodplains and predict the likelihood of flooding in India or Indonesia based on applying some AI techniques around satellite data. But again, relating all of that back to the impact of a river flooding also then has an impact on the community, on the public health environment, on the settlements that build up around a river. And so this whole notion of leveraging AI in the context of massive data analytics to improve the goals around poverty, public health, and wellness is a key part of that.
Now, you're part of the AI for Good community at ITU. For you, what's the importance of that for you?
We realized very early on, as we were launching this new institute within Monash, that there was a bigger community that was building around the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We have collaborators in the United Kingdom who were already getting involved in the AI for Good initiatives. I was very aware of the Geneva conference that was held back in 2019, which was really, for me, an opportunity to bring together this real international audience, not just audience, but international community of people really focused on how do we accelerate our progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. And so as we launched the Institute, middle of 2019, we felt it was very important to be engaged with this new and growing community around the AI for Good Summit. And so we signed up pretty early on to be part of this growing community. And for us, what's been really interesting is the breadth and depth of conversations and topics that we've been engaged in. We had some discussions last year around the application of AI for sustainable energy. How does AI help or impact the fashion industry and the disposal of waste within the fashion industry? How does AI impact the life of a musician from an arts perspective? The impact of AI to be able to help physically disabled people appreciate and understand arts and music and science in different ways. So for us, it's really been a community that is like-minded. It's very broad in its focus around not just technology, but the social and humanitarian aspects of AI for Good. And so it's been very important for us to be part of that community. But also it's been a way for us to be able to demonstrate what we have at Monash. One of the first questions you asked me is, well, who is Monash? Where is Monash? Do people outside of Australia understand who we are as an institution? This has been really and truly a way for us to be able to cement that international university feel that we have in the context of this much broader international audience of the North Americas, Europe, and the broader Asia Pacific community. And for us really to build new research collaborations and partnerships moving forward.
Well, Professor, thanks very much for your time for a very interesting discussion. So we'll be hearing much more from Monash in the future.
Thanks very much, Chris. It's been great having a conversation today.
Thank you. So that was Professor Joanna Batstone, who's the director of the Data Futures Institute at Monash University. Stay tuned because we have much more coming up all year and always online.